Well, I don't know how you're all doing with this time change, but this is not one of my favorite days of the year. Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for the extra daylight and all of that, but an alarm went off real early this morning. And you know, it's interesting because every year at this time there seem to be these articles that pop up that talk about daylight saving time and talk about why we do it in history and what we should be doing instead. But there was one that I was looking at yesterday that I found really interesting. And it was talking about the business impact of daylight saving time. And I never realized this, but apparently $174 billion are lost every year by airline industries just because of the time change. Because not every country changes times and not every place changes. And so people get confused about what time it is, where, and when things need to arrive. And so shipments are lost, planes are missed, and it ends up costing a lot of money. And so I think in all of this sort of confusion and strife and this draining of the energy, and yet I have to admit, I'm kind of excited. Because you know what? It means spring is coming. It means spring is almost here. Yes, we can applaud for spring. The weather outside is beautiful today. I went home last week and turned on the radio when there was a Royals baseball game on the radio. And you know what I'm really excited about? I get to start my garden soon. Sarah and I love to work in the garden. We have a garden that we plant every year. And so we're already talking and thinking about our garden and what we can do in it. And I know the Unity Garden has begun their work. They've got things growing in the greenhouse, getting ready to feed the people that use Head Start in Johnson County and provide them with fresh produce. And so I was thinking about this idea of gardening. And all of a sudden I realized what a wonderful metaphor for our own soul's transformation the gardening process is. That idea that we take a seed, a little tiny seed, and we plant it. And this transformation occurs and it grows into something wonderful. What a great metaphor for how each one of us undertakes spiritual growth. How each one of us transforms ourselves at depth. And so we're actually going to be exploring that over the next few weeks leading up to Easter. We're going to spend a few Sundays looking at this process of transformation and looking at how each one of us can take those little spiritual seeds, those little bits of wisdom that are planted within us in every moment and really grow them into the magnificence that each of us is capable of becoming. But for today, we're going to focus on that first stage of nurturing those seeds, of nurturing those spiritual ideas that are there within us. And so before we can get too far down that path of how to nurture those seeds, what I'd like to do first is just answer the question. Where do those seeds come from to begin with? Where do we find the seeds of spiritual truth that can help grow us into who we're meant to be? Well, the simple answer is we can find them anywhere. And I know that's probably not the most enlightening answer to that question that I could give you is, they're going to come from anywhere. But it's true. That's the truth of it. You know, I can think of times when I was sitting out here on Sunday morning and I heard something that just kind of planted that little seed in my mind. Or when I was reading a book by Michael Beckwith or or Eric Butterworth. Or even when I'd read something in the scriptures and then I went back to a Bible commentary and looked at what it had to say about that seed or that particular passage. Oh, well, there's something new there. And they don't just come to us during times of spiritual inspiration. You know, I've had them come while I was watching TV, while I was listening to music, having a conversation with friends and family. Just these little bits of wisdom that have planted themselves in me and yet later on managed to change me at depth. Now, I think oftentimes we get wrapped up, and what I want you to know is that I'm not telling you that we need to go out and search for these seeds. We need to find these places where we can be spiritually changed. In fact, as I was thinking about where do we go to look for these, I was reminded of a passage from the book of Revelation. And actually, I didn't realize this was from Revelation. I knew the passage, and then when I typed it into Google, it came up Revelation, and I kind of went, really? I didn't know that was there. But it's from the 3rd chapter of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20. And in this chapter, the author of the book of Revelation, John, writes, "Listen, I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to you and eat with you, and you with me." I am standing at the door knocking. You see, our work isn't to go out and find these seeds. It's just to be open and ready for when we hear that knock. When we hear that knock of spiritual wisdom, to open the door and to let those seeds come into us. Now, just as an aside, a little history about the book of Revelation. This was actually written, in this section, was written as a letter to 7 churches. You might know, if you're really into Revelation, the whole 7 seals, those represented 7 other churches. And the author of the book, his name was John, and most biblical scholars will tell you that this is not the same John that was a disciple of Jesus, that this was a different man. His name may not have even been John, and he just used the name John to lend credibility to what he was writing. But he had addressed these 7 churches. And then he writes that line about standing at the door and knocking. And that line was meant to be a message to those churches to say, be open to what I'm about to tell you. I'm offering you this wisdom, and if you're willing to take it in, you'll be changed at depth. And so for all of us, the message that we can take from that and apply to our lives today is that idea that if we're open to hearing that message, if we're open to hearing the voice of Spirit, the knocking of Spirit on our souls, then we're ready to be changed at depth. So we have to take these seeds in, and we have to allow these seeds to become a part of what and who we are. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at this entire process of transformation, from the nurturing of these spiritual seedlings all the way up to the faith and love that's required to harvest the spiritual fruit of our transformation. We're going to cover that whole process. And it's a big process. So today, we're going to focus on just that first step. That step that I feel in many ways is the most critical step when we receive that spiritual wisdom, and that's nurturing these seeds of spiritual growth within us. You know, you might remember a parable that Jesus told that was the parable of the sower. And he was talking to his disciples and the followers, and he talked about seed being scattered on the ground, and how some of the seed falls on rocky soil, and some of the seed falls on dry, thorny soil, and then some of it falls on fertile soil. Now, I don't think it's much of a stretch for me to get to the place where we can understand that these seeds could be literal seeds, but they can also be those spiritual seeds. And so the message for us is, how do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare our souls, the soil of our soul, to be able to receive those seeds, to nurture them so that they can take root and grow within us? Because you know, those seeds from God, they're the same as the seeds we plant in the ground. They're filled with all of that same wisdom. And so the important work for us to do is to continue maintaining our own spiritual practice. And so what we're going to explore today are just two things that you can do that will help you nurture your own spiritual growth, your own spiritual development. You see, the truth of the matter is there are any number of things that you can do to help practice the presence of God in your life. But today we're going to focus on just 2 things. And you know, I think it's appropriate that the 2 things that we're going to focus on today came from Reverend Sally Taylor's last visit to Unity Church of Overland Park. And see, it was June 9th of 2013 was the last time that Sally spoke here. And she shared with us that day a lesson called The Gift Within. And the gift within is the Christ nature that's within all of us. And what Sally did is she shared with us things that you could do to nurture that gift within. She actually gave us these cards that day. And since I heard that lesson, this card has been on my refrigerator at home. And I've looked at this every day, and so when I was thinking, okay, how can we talk about nurturing seeds, all of a sudden I saw this. And I thought, yeah, that's how we can nurture our seeds. And there were two things in particular, two of these processes, and these aren't steps. These are things that you can do. You don't have to do one and then the other. And there were two of these that really stood out for me. The first one is love God with all your heart, acknowledging that God is the only power and that there is no power in effect. And the second thing, was to love your neighbor as yourself by refraining from negative judgment and by forgiving 70 times 7. So we're going to take a look at how you can put those two things into practice, how you can grow those seeds, nurture those seeds within you. Because you see, spiritual transformation is about shifting our perspective. It's about shifting our perspective from one of the material world to one that remembers that we seek the presence of God within first. Now let me be very clear. This is not me telling you that the material world is bad. This is not me telling you that you should forget and shun the nice things of the world and that you only need to focus on God. What I'm telling you is that those things are nice. We're here to enjoy the world. We can enjoy the world around us. But what we cannot forget is the truth of what lies beneath those material things of the world. And that's the divine substance of God. You see, our spiritual transformation is about shifting from a place where we rely on the world to a place where we know that that divine substance of God is moving within us, that it's supporting our experience of the material world. And so we begin to make that transition. We begin to shift our perspective. We rely on the divine substance that exists beneath the physical expression of our world, not the physical expression of the world itself. So we begin to remember to go to God first, to remember that God is the only power in effect. Now, I looked up the meaning of the word effect. Now, I know and understand that there's cause and effect. So something happens, and then the thing that happens because of that is the effect. And I like that definition, but what I really liked for our purposes today was the second definition that was below that, where effect was defined as a power to produce results. Effect was defined as a force, as a validity, as an influence in our world. And so if we think of this in the terms of God as the only effect, really what that means is that there is no power that can provide results or influence or validity over our lives other than that which we call God, that which we call Spirit, that which we call the Christ. That is the only thing that can truly have that effect, that power to provide results in your life, is the presence of God. But we have to do some things to get there first. I wish I could snap my fingers and we'd all start getting that idea. But it takes practice. See, we have to practice this presence, this principle of God. Just like these artists, these musicians that you heard up here this morning playing and singing. They didn't just come in this morning and do that. It takes hours and hours and hours of practice. And so we too have to begin practicing the presence of God. And there's two steps that we can undertake to practice that presence. And the first one is with our head. It's with our mind. We're exercising this part of the process right now. We're all sitting here listening to what I'm saying, and you're taking in bits of wisdom. You're taking in things that I'm saying, and some of them are taking root in your mind, and some of them aren't, and some of you are sitting here going, okay, we've got maybe another 5-10 minutes, and that's okay. But those seeds are getting planted. You know, there's another step we have to take. We can't just let them sit in our mind at that sort of mental level. We have to take them down into our heart. We have to reflect on them. We have to spend time in meditation dwelling on the spiritual truth that we have heard. We have to sort of go apart and go within ourselves and dwell on that and allow the truth to transform us. Allow the truth as we see it to transform us. And that was why I love this image so much. You know, when Jan Chapman, our communications director, and I first talked about what this lesson was going to be and how we were going to move into Easter, and I talked about this idea of growing the seeds that are planted within us, she found this image. And I don't know about you, but I'm a visual person. So when I see something like that, I think, yeah, that's it. It's that idea that we go within ourselves. We go within with only us, with nothing else there to support us, just me. And we focus on ourselves. We focus on the spiritual truth that we wish to become, and we allow that truth to transform us at depth. But it's an internal process. It's a process that only we can undertake by ourselves. Now, we could get into art criticism if we'd like, but I thought we'd focus more on the spiritual side of it. I thought, what a wonderful image to show how you can be transformed when you're willing to go within and do that inner work. And so that's the first thing we can undertake. We can love God as we love ourselves. We can love that presence of God and know that there is no other power in effect in our lives. So we focus that attention, our attention, on practicing the presence of God that we're seeking. Not just going to church and passively waiting for God to inspire us, but actively practicing the principles that we hear, and then allowing those to transform us, allowing those to guide us to our own understanding of truth. So that's one practice you can put into place to begin nurturing these seeds. The second thing we can do to begin nurturing our seeds, the second thing you can put into practice, is to love your neighbor as yourself by refraining from negative judgment and by forgiving 70 times 7. Now, I know that I am not the first minister that you have heard stand on this platform and tell you you have to forgive. Reverend Sally said it, Reverend Edwin said it, Reverend Patricia said it. We keep saying it because it's that important. It is so vitally important that we forgive those around us, that we forgive ourselves. So how important is forgiveness? How important is it that we forgive people around us? You know, there's a legend about the painting of the Last Supper. And this one has absolutely nothing to do with Dan Brown. That's a wonderful legend too, but this is a different legend about Leonardo da Vinci and the painting of the Last Supper. And the story is that as Leonardo was painting the face of Jesus on that fresco, that he got into a fight with another man. Now, the details of the fight, those have been lost to history. We have no idea what they were arguing about. But what we do know is that it was a fairly violent physical altercation. Apparently, Leonardo even threatened the man with bodily harm. And after the man left, Leonardo went back to trying to paint the face of Jesus. And he couldn't do it. He tried, and he tried, and he tried to paint the face of Jesus. But as long as that animosity, that anger was still in his heart, it wasn't right. He wasn't able to sort of encompass that peace and the love that he wanted to see in the face of Jesus. And so he sought out the man that he'd had the argument with, and he apologized. And they made amends. And it was only after that, according to the legend, that Leonardo was able to paint the face of Jesus. See, it was only after he forgave that he was able to open himself up to that spirit. Now, I know that there are many of us out there that when it comes to forgiveness, that say there are some things I can't forgive. There are some things that are just too big, I can't forgive that. And I suppose there are some things that I can think of that I would have a hard time forgiving. I think of stories about family members that have forgiven the person that committed a violent crime against a loved one. I think, I don't know if I can do that. And as I was reflecting on that idea, what I realized is that we really need to change our perspective about forgiveness. You see, we need to shift from thinking of things that it's not too big for me to forgive. It's just something that's so big that it's going to take me time to forgive. You see, forgiveness is a journey that each of us has to undertake. And I don't want any of you to think that it's some sort of simple process, that we should all just go out and say, I apologize for what happened and it's over. Sometimes it's a very long road that we have to travel down to get to that place of forgiveness. But it's a road we have to go down if we want to truly transform our lives. We did an exercise with the children and youth and family ministry shortly after I became the YFM director. We gave each of the children a black-eyed pea. And we asked them to put it in their shoe. And we had them walk around the room. And we asked them, what was it like walking around with that bean in your shoe? And most of them said fairly quickly, I didn't like it. It wasn't comfortable. And then we said, well, how is that like holding on to a grudge for someone else? And what they realized was that when you're holding on to a grudge, when you're unwilling to forgive and move into that place of letting go, you're not getting back at the person who you feel wronged you. You're not getting back at that situation. You're walking around uncomfortable because you have a bean in your shoe. So how do we know if we have a bean in our shoe? Because I know what's happened to me is that sometimes I get so used to that feeling, that sort of feeling of not being happy with someone, that it becomes comfortable. I forget I'm feeling that way. So how do we identify those beans, those things we need to forgive? We simply ask. We go into our prayer time, into that moment of stillness with God, and we say, is there anything that I need to let go of? Is there anything that it's time for me to forgive? And most of the time, the answer, whether we like it or not, is going to come up for us. But I want us to be very clear on what it is that we're forgiving when we do this sort of work. You see, we're not necessarily forgiving the actual situation. We're not forgiving what it was that happened. It's like what we have written on this card that Sally gave me and gave all of us. We're refraining from negative judgment. You see, what we're forgiving is the judgment that we held about that person or that situation. We're forgiving the judgment that whoever it was or whatever it was that wronged us was any less the presence of God than we are. Now, they may not have been expressing their full Christ self in that moment, but let's be honest, there are a whole lot of us wandering around this world every day not expressing our full Christ selves. What we're forgiving is our judgment of them. We're forgiving that part of us that said, I'm more Christ than you. I know better than you. I knew what I should have done. See, that's what we're forgiving. And honestly, I have a little bit of forgiveness work to do towards the officials in yesterday's KU game. Which brings me to the next point about our forgiveness work. There will be times where you are not ready to move into that space of forgiveness yet. Remember, I said it's a process. It's a long process sometimes. That's okay. But what you can do is move into that intention to forgive. When you go into that space of prayer, when you go into that space of meditation, hold that intention that you forgive those who you've judged to not be the fullness of the Christ. Hold that intention that I will move into that space of being able to say, I am wholly and fully sorry for judging you as any less the presence of God than I am. And even just the inklings of that intention will be enough to begin moving you into nurturing those seeds of transformation. Because honestly, that's what we're about. That's what these next few weeks are going to be about. Or they're going to be about taking those seeds and moving them from that place where we see them beginning to work within us, to begin growing within us, to the place where they are fully realized outpicturings of the divine presence that each of us is. And so, as I said earlier, these two practices, this forgiveness practice and this idea of loving God, they're just two things that you can do to begin to nurture those seeds of God within you. You can choose to spend your time loving God and showing that love through really engaging, honestly engaging in a practice of spiritual study and reflection as you work your way towards that understanding of the power and presence of God that you are. You could also choose to spend time doing forgiveness work. Spend your time reflecting on those times in your life where you judged a fellow traveler on this plane to be any less the presence of the Christ than they are. And then you spend your time apologizing for that. You know, either possibility is a very, very powerful tool that you can begin to use to transform your life, that you can begin to use to nurture these seeds. You don't have to do them both. You can, but you don't have to do them both. I would say pick one and spend time this week really practicing that. You know, Sally included a quote from Joel Goldsmith at the bottom of this card. And the quote she included says, "A full realization of any one of these principles, living and working with it day after day and week after week, will be sufficient to transform our experience and usher us into the kingdom of God." And so this is how our journey begins. And I want each one of us to take time during this coming week nurturing those seeds of transformation that are already there within you. You see, you're being transformed at depth right here, right now, whether you realize it or not. And that's one of the most amazing things about this early critical stage of this process. Because right now, just like those seeds that have been planted in the earth and the ground, amazing changes are taking place just below the surface. They're just not visible yet. We'll talk about what happens when they become visible next week. We'll begin to explore what happens as those glimpses of brilliance break through the ground and into our lives, as those glimpses of the Christ break through the ground and into our lives. But for now, for today, for this week, we commit to doing the work that is necessary to nurture those spiritual seedlings that are growing within us. God bless you all.